Stability isn't a gift. It's a weapon forged in the dark while your heart bleeds and your sister sleeps. For 20 years, Walter Harrington sat on a throne built from the jagged rubble that killed my parents. He thought he'd buried the truth under 3 million tons of Colorado earth and a billion-dollar legacy. But today, in the middle of his son's $10 million wedding, I didn't come for the champagne. I didn't come to wish the couple well. Came to pull the final beam. I came to prove that even the tallest empire can be reduced to dust if you hit the right stress point. And before the first toast was over, I was going to make sure the world saw the blood on his hands. The ballroom in Aspen shimmered like a cold, expensive dream. Sunlight bounced off the vaulted glass roof, casting clinical glints of mountain snow across 200 guests who had never known a day of real hunger. The jazz band played something light, polished, and hollow, the kind of music meant to fill the uncomfortable silence between lies. The air smelled of expensive lilies and the sterile metallic scent of extreme wealth. I sat at the farthest table, tucked behind a massive centerpiece of white hydrangeas and flickering candles. I was the ghost at the feast. My sister Riley was at the head table, looking like a fragile angel in a custom silk gown. But I could see the tremor in her hands. I was the only one who noticed the way she gripped the edge of the tablecloth. At the center of it all sat Walter Harrington. He was 60 years of tailored wool, commanding charm, and absolute cruelty. He looked every bit the king of the mountain. He raised his crystal glass, the vintage red wine catching the light like a fresh wound. "To Riley," he boomed, his voice cutting through the room with the practiced authority of a man who owned the ground everyone stood on. "A lovely young woman who will finally have a stable family, something her own sister clearly could never give her growing up." A ripple of uneasy, polished laughter followed. Someone clinked a glass too loudly. Someone else cleared their throat. Riley froze. Derek, the groom and Walter's son, looked down at his plate. "My name is Clorinda Petton," and that insult was the last mistake Walter Harrington would ever make. He thought he was mocking a poor, bitter older sister. He didn't realize he was mocking a structural engineer who had spent every waking second of the last 7,000 days calculating his total destruction. To understand the wedding you have to understand the mine. I was 17 the night the world ended. The Rocky Ridge mine wasn't just a place where coal was pulled from the earth. It was the heartbeat of our town. My parents were both engineers there, meticulous, safety-conscious people who believed that if you built something right, it would stand forever. I remember the sirens. They didn't sound like ordinary sirens. They sounded like the earth itself was screaming. I ran to the chain-link fence, the freezing Colorado wind biting into my face, and watched as the mountain seemed to swallow itself. The ambulances wailed into the black night, but they didn't have anyone to carry. They said it was a natural quake, a tragic accident, an act of God. But God didn't sign the safety bypasses. Walter Harrington did. I walked into the Harrington mining office 2 days after the funeral with a folded newspaper in my hand. I was a child in a worn-out coat, and the man behind the mahogany desk didn't even look up at me. "You should move on, kid," he'd said. "Harrington paid for the caskets. That's more than most get. Accidents happen." He didn't see me reach across his desk and snatch a blue folder. He didn't see me tuck the internal site report under my shirt. I ran home to our empty house, my hands shaking as I spread the papers out on the kitchen table. There in cold, faint ink was the truth, approved for cost reduction. Reinforcement beams skipped. Estimated savings, $3.2 million. Signed, W. Harrington. They died for $3 million. A rounding error in Walter's portfolio. That was the day I stopped believing in accidents and started believing in blueprints. Riley was only 7 when they died. She didn't understand the physics of a cave-in. She only understood that Mom and Dad weren't coming home. I became her mother, her father, and her bodyguard. I worked triple shifts. I washed dishes until my cuticles bled so I could buy her school shoes. I tutored college students in calculus while I was still in high school. Every penny was split. Half for Riley's life, half for my education. I needed the degree. I didn't want to just scream at Walter. I wanted to speak the language of the structures he used to hide his crimes. Years passed in a blur of concrete dust and flickering lamplight. I built bridges by day, literally and figuratively. I earned my license in civil engineering. I learned how to read the stress on a beam before it even cracked. I learned how to find the weakness in a design. And every night after Riley went to sleep, I opened my Harrington file, followed the money. I spent years lurking on dark web financial forums and befriending disgruntled ex-accountants. I met Lennox, an investigative journalist who had lost his father in the same mine. Together we became a shadow team. We found the offshore accounts in the Bahamas where that saved $3.2 million had been moved. We found the shell companies. But then the unthinkable happened. Riley met Derek Harrington. "He's not his father, Claire," Riley had pleaded when she first brought him home. "Derek is different. He's kind. He wants to do good." I wanted to believe her. I tried to see the man, not the last name. But then I saw the way Walter looked at my sister. It wasn't the look of a future father-in-law. It was the look of a man seeing a strategic asset. I went back to the blueprints. I started looking into Walter's newest project, the Rocky Ridge extension. It was a massive, multi-billion-dollar luxury development built right over the old mine site. And that's when I found the new sin. Walter wasn't just building houses. He was laundering money for an international cartel through the construction costs. And the person listed as the primary shareholder for the shell company, Riley Petton. He had forged her signature. He was setting her up to be the owner of a criminal enterprise. If the project ever went south, Riley would be the one going to prison while Walter walked away with a clean record. He wasn't just bringing her into the family. He was using her as a human shield. "I can't stop the wedding," I whispered to the photo of my parents on my desk. "But I can make sure it's the last thing he ever hosts." The 2 weeks leading up to the wedding were a masterpiece of psychological warfare. I sent Walter an anonymous gift. Silver frame. Inside was a high-resolution photo of the collapsed mine from 20 years ago. But I'd engineered the glass with a polarizing filter. From one angle it was just a tragedy. From the other, it revealed a faint overlay of the offshore bank transfer codes. I knew he'd see it. I knew he'd panic. Then I leaked a small, insignificant rumor to the SEC, just enough to get a preliminary audit started on the wedding day. I knew Walter's ego. He wouldn't cancel the wedding. He would try to toast his way out of it. He would use the event to show the world he was untouchable. The night before the ceremony, Riley came to my room. She was pale, her eyes bloodshot. "Derek says the company is in trouble," she whispered. "He says someone is attacking his dad. Is it you, Claire? Please, if you love me, just stop. I just want one day of happiness." My heart broke for her. I wanted to tell her the truth, but I knew Walter had her phone bugged. I knew he was listening. "I'm not attacking anyone, Riley," I said, tucking a lock of hair behind her ear. "I'm just making sure the foundation is solid. Truth isn't an attack. It's a restoration." She left, looking at me like I was a stranger. She didn't understand that the happiness Walter was offering her was a prison cell. The morning of the wedding was quiet. The snow in Aspen fell in thick, heavy flakes, muffling the world. I dressed in a silver gown that felt like cold mail. In my clutch, I didn't have lipstick or a mirror. I had a tablet synced to Lennox's server and my father's old drafting pencil. The ceremony was a blur of expensive flowers and meaningless vows. When it moved to the ballroom for the reception, the tension was thick enough to taste. Walter was sweating, though he tried to hide it with a smile that looked like a scar. He rose for his toast. This was the moment. 1:45 p.m. The exact time the SEC had been scheduled to freeze his domestic accounts and seize the servers at his headquarters. "To Riley," Walter said, his voice booming. "A girl from nowhere who finally has a name worth having. A stable family. Something her sister could never provide." The laughter rippled. Walter looked at me, a smug, murderous glint in his eye. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd silenced me. I stood up. I didn't wait for the laughter to die down. "Mr. Harrington," I said, my voice echoing with a clarity that made the jazz band stop playing. "You talk a lot about stability. For someone who builds on hollow ground. Do you even know what keeps a structure standing?" Walter's smile faltered. "Clorinda, sit down. You've had too much wine." "I haven't touched my glass," I said, walking toward the center of the dance floor. All eyes were on me. The cameras, the ones streaming the wedding to the elite of the mining world, were all focused on my face. "Physics doesn't care about your money, Walter. It doesn't care about your tailored suits. It only cares about the load. And today, the load of your lies is finally too heavy for the beams." I tapped a command on my tablet. Behind Walter, the massive LED screens, which had been showing a slideshow of the couple's childhood, flickered. Suddenly, the photos vanished. In their place appeared the 1996 site report, the cost reduction memo, and then the current laundering logs with Riley's forged signature. "What is this?" Derek shouted, standing up. "That," I said, pointing to the screen, "is why my parents are dead. And that is why your father is using your wife as a sacrificial lamb for the cartel." Walter's face went from pale to a terrifying, bruised purple. He reached for his phone, but it was already ringing. He looked at the screen. His lawyer. The CFO. His world was collapsing in real time. "You think you can do this to me?" Walter hissed, stepping off the dais. "In my own house. I'll bury you just like I buried them." "The difference between you and me, Walter," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that felt like a scream, "is that you build to hide. I build to last. And I built this trap 20 years ago." The doors to the ballroom burst open. Not more guests. Federal agents. The chaos that followed was a symphony of justice. Walter tried to flee through the kitchen, but they caught him before he reached the parking lot. The photo of him being led through the snow in a tuxedo, silver handcuffs glinting under the Aspen sun, became the defining image of the decade's biggest financial scandal. Riley sat on the floor of the ballroom, her white dress spread out around her like a broken wing. Derek was on his knees beside her, sobbing. He hadn't known. He was a Harrington, but he wasn't a monster. I walked over to my sister and knelt down. "You destroyed everything," she whispered, her voice cracked and raw. "You humiliated me. My wedding. My life." "No, Riley," I said, taking her hand. It was cold. "I stopped you from being the one in those handcuffs. I stopped you from paying for his crimes. Look at the screen, Riley. He was going to let you go to prison for him." She looked up at the forged signatures. She looked at the dates. And slowly, the realization dawned on her. The stable family Walter had offered was a trapdoor. The trial lasted 8 months. I testified for 4 days. I spoke about the physics of the mine. I showed the jury the blueprints of a murder. I showed them how Walter had systematically stripped the safety from the lives of his workers to pad his own pockets. Walter was sentenced to 25 years. No parole. He'll die in a cell that isn't nearly as reinforced as the mine should have been. A year has passed. The Harrington empire is gone. The assets were seized, the ghost properties were sold, and the money was funneled into the Peton Memorial Trust. We used the funds to build a state-of-the-art safety training center on the site of the old mine. Riley and I live in a house we built ourselves. It's not a mansion. It's not made of glass. It's made of stone, cedar, and truth. Riley is back in school, studying art. She's learning to draw things that aren't tainted by the Harrington name. Derek stayed. He renounced his inheritance and works for the trust now, helping us track down the other families affected by his father's cost reductions. It took a long time, but Riley finally forgave me. She realized that I didn't break her wedding. I broke her chains. Last week, I went back to the Rocky Ridge site. I stood where the fence used to be. The air was clean, smelling of pine and new earth. The monument we built stands tall against the mountain wind, a simple marble pillar with the names of everyone who died that night. I pulled my father's old drafting pencil from my pocket. It was worn down, the lead almost gone. I touched the cold stone of the monument and felt a sense of stillness I hadn't known in 20 years. "The ground holds, Dad," I whispered. "The foundation is finally solid." I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Because when you build something on the truth, you don't have to worry about it collapsing behind you. They called it a revenge story. But as I watched the sunrise over the mountains, I know the real name for it. It was a restoration. If this story stirred something inside you, don't scroll away in silence. Tap like. It tells us these stories deserve to be told. Subscribe to Vengeful Goddess for unforgettable tales of betrayal, resilience, and justice. Stories you won't hear anywhere else. Turn on the bell icon so the next story reaches you the moment it drops. Your support keeps these voices alive. Because sometimes, revenge isn't loud, being heard is.